Good evening and welcome to Let's Talk Politics. I'm your host, Michael Gordon. This program is brought to you by the People's Progressive Party, and I'd like to thank all of you across the length and breadth of this country for joining us tonight, and for those viewing us in the diaspora and listening on Freedom Radio. I thank you for being a part of this program. The issue of electoral reform has emerged as a front burner subject. And more recently, the International Republican Institute has offered to fund some aspects of Guyana electoral reform process. One would recall the International Republican Institute was the non-governmental organization, the international organization, which funded and was essentially the driving force behind the Vote Like a Boss campaign in 2015, and have been part of a number of campaigns which the APNU AFC supported at their time in opposition. Joining me tonight to discuss these and many other issues and the APNU AFC's continued attempts to use the court, to hide behind the court in an attempt not to, for their true colors to be revealed. I am joined tonight by Attorney at Law, Mr. Sase Gunraj, who also is a commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commissioner. Mr. Gunraj, I'd like to thank you, Sase, for being a part of this program tonight. We have so much to discuss.
Thank you, Michael, for having me, and good evening to all our viewers, both locally, on the traditional and social media, and overseas.
I
Pleasure to be here as
also,
usual.
I'm more than, it's my pleasure having you here, Sase. I also omitted to mention, for some reason or the other, the Guyana Human Rights Association, in opposition to electoral reform and in proposing cosmetic preconditions before electoral reform, has emerged out of the shadows. And I am appalled, I'm taken aback, I'm upset, I'm angry. And there are many more adjectives I could use to describe my current state of mind, because Guyana was essentially cast onto the shadows of being an undemocratic state since December 2018. And there has been a deafening silence, a glaring absence by the Guyana Human Rights Association. And I'm amazed, and as I said, angry, that this bunch of people with political agendas and clear anti-PPP agendas have raised their ugly heads in opposition to electoral reform. It is not the beginning of the opposition to electoral reform. It began with the objections emanating from the main opposition, PNC. But since I could not start at any other point but by criticizing the Guyana Human Rights Association. And I know this is not Michael Gordon's personal program and Michael Gordon's personal page, but where the hell were they 1 year ago? Sis.
Michael, it's not usual that I see you in this angry mood, but sometimes the angry mood is what gets uh, the proper emotions and the proper adjectives to describe the shenanigans out. Um, I want to start from a different point from you, and I'll get to the Guyana Human Rights Association very shortly. But I want to start out from the issue of electoral reform. I said on the last program that I appeared with you that while electoral reform is an important facet in ensuring that the activities or what the attempt at derailing the democratic progress that this country has made over the last just under 30 years by the PNC last year, um, while it is important for us to have electoral conformity, that is to say, conformity with the electoral laws that currently exist. Obviously, there's a lot of room for reform, for change, for improvement. That being said, in order for you to change, you have to analyze what you have. Look at where the current provisions were inadequate. Look at where you need a more stringent measures. Look at where you need greater safeguards. An evaluation of the entire process, if I may, to determine what needs to be changed. And then after you determine what needs to be changed, then you have to go to how it is changed. So this is not a ad hoc process that someone wakes up one morning and decides, look, electoral reform is a nice sounding catchphrase and we should latch on to it, and that it is a panacea for all of the ills that come with the electoral process that we have seen last year. No, this is a systematic process. And for me, it matters not who conducts that analysis, that evaluation, as long as it is done in a proper, holistic, responsible, and impartial manner. Enters the International Republican Institute. Commissioner Bibi Shadick, and I'm not taking tales out of school here, said in the aborted meeting of Tuesday last, that the IRA is not exactly her favorite organization, but she recognizes its capabilities in carrying out these functions that I just adumbrated, and as a consequence, she is willing to participate in any process that they are going to be spearheading. The meeting of Tuesday last was intended to be an information sharing engagement, whereby the scope of the project, perhaps some methodology, etc., could be shared with the Commission so that the very procedure that I just described could be embarked upon. We have to analyze what we have before we decide where we are going. Lo and behold, that was met with very spurious objections by the opposition nominated commissioners, a matter which has now been reported pretty fairly widely in the press, and a matter on which I have commented extensively over the last few days. Now, I am not surprised. I posited in the media that I wonder whether the opposition is scared of electoral reform. Or I am now wondering whether they are so happy with the failed attempt of last year that they are hoping that the laws remain the same so that a similar attempt can be made in the future. Obviously, that will not be countenanced by any person, any participant, any stakeholder, any regulator, observer in the process. It will obviously not be countenanced. Right? The trending phrase on Facebook and social media now is that you're big and you have sense. Guyana as a whole and individuals who make up that whole, both locally and abroad, and also our friends and well-wishers who are not Guyanese, have all been forced to grow up because of what was attempted to be foisted upon us. And our eyes have opened. The collective and individual senses have been awakened. So obviously it will not happen. It cannot happen. It will not be allowed. Now you move forward. You move forward and you look at the objections that are being raised to the IRI's role in this project. You correctly said when you started just now that IRI was welcomed with open hands, with open arms in 2015. I remember having objections to the way in which some of the programs were run off and so on, because I felt as though it had a clear bias. However, when you look now at what is being offered and what is necessary in the circumstances, that is to say, the evaluation that I keep touting all the time, like it doesn't matter who conducts it, as long as it is conducted in a fair, transparent, and impartial, comprehensive, and holistic manner. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, at this stage to not even convince me, to even suggest to me that a contrary intention is being harbored.
Sis, I absolutely agree with you. And as you rightly said, the opposition nominated commissioners and their shenanigans were more than, one can describe it as being more than transparent in their attempt to ensure that this process does not obtain. What I find strange is that everyone recognized, including the opposition commissioners, I believe the most vocal among whom was Mr. Vincent Alexander, in his recognition of flaws that emerge out of the electoral system in Guyana. Notwithstanding the fact that Guyana has a significantly superior electoral system, and to which it was referred by former Prime Minister of Jamaica, Mr. Bruce Golding. He referred to the soundness of Guyana's electoral system. Notwithstanding that, all and sundry acknowledged that there were some aspects, perhaps not of the polling, the actual polling, but many of the processes that followed, or perhaps many of the processes that led up to March 2nd, 2020. What is astonishing is the plethora and the amount of objection or stumbling blocks, or rather red herrings that are now being thrown in the way of this process. It's unimaginable, to say the least. And even in the midst of this this seeming impasse on electoral reform, there continues to be APNU AFC shenanigans in court, and we're going to talk a little more about that. But I have found in many instances, as it relates to the elections laws of Guyana, the PNC elements in the GECOM Secretariat, beginning with Mr. Keith Lowenfield, the Chief Elections Officer, have been inconsistent and have contradicted themselves repeatedly in the past 7 years or so as it relates to the electoral processes in Guyana. In addition to that, says, you have found that many, if not all, of the opposition or the PNC nominated commissioners, and I'm including Mr. Trotman in that. He purportedly comes from the WPA, whatever that is, now, and they continue to shift the goalposts as it relates to their own interpretations of the electoral laws in Guyana, wherever it suits them, and also in their attempts to cloud the vision of the Guyanese populace, especially the voting population of Guyana, as it relates to their attempts to manipulate the electoral process, electoral laws of Guyana, in ways that benefit only Congress players.
Well, before I get to that aspect of what you're talking about, Mike, allow me to follow up on your earlier comments and thoughts about GHRA, Guyana Human Rights Association's position on this impending IRI project. Now, as you said, as you said, the silence from the Guyana Human Rights Association was deafening a year ago. Not a singular utterance. And you know, Freddie Kissoon has written extensively about these uh, organizations that exist only in name and which seem to come out of the woodwork on occasions that it only suits them and take these grandiose positions uh, when in truth and in fact we know differently about their integrity. The Guyana Human Rights Association, in the face of such horrible atrocities a year ago, failed and are neglected to even utter a single word, issue a single statement, take any stance upon the trampling of democracy. But you know what? You could understand their position, you know, Michael. Those are let me not paint all of these civil organizations with one brush. Let me speak specifically to the Guyana Human Rights Association. The Guyana Human Rights Association does not know what it means to be democratic. They don't know the meaning of democracy. The organization itself, if someone can point to me to one other person other than Mike McCormack, if that's what his name is, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, who sits on the Guyana Human Rights Association, who represents Guyana Human Rights Association, and name me three issues in the last year that they have spoken upon with some true justification, then I will rest my case and offer a unsolicited and unqualified apology to the Guyana Human Rights Association. There are some schools of thoughts and some articles emerging that this very COVID pandemic that we are suffering, borders are threatening so many human rights. You never heard a statement from them. You have so many other issues that plague our society, that affects the rights of our citizens. You don't hear anything from them. But then you get this long spiel from the Guyana Human Rights Association about, and it is packed with politics and personal opinions and prejudices uh, in relation to the IRI, and why they should not be the agency that is responsible or to undertake this project. Why doesn't the Guyana Human Rights Association first of all recognize the need in the first place, the reason that we have to engage ourselves in this activity, the barefaced riggery and thievery that was attempted, the trampling on democracy that caused, that occasion, that necessitated all of this. But no, but no. They've now come out of the woodwork. They have now tried to gain some relevance in these circumstances to criticize when they are not doing any better. I don't know when last the Guyana Human Rights Association has had an election for office bearers. I don't know how the office bearers are who are office bearers except one name that you always hear. It's a one-man organization. You know, having said all of that, Michael, if it weren't for the importance of this project to the well-being of Guyana and the democracy this fledgling democracy in which we exist, it was easy to discount. It is easy to discount um, oh, and discount and discard views such as the Ghana Human Rights Association. But it's important, it is good that we can see who are the persons who support democracy and the persons who are against it. I remember a year ago, I had this hashtag that I used to end most of my social media posts with. Are you a rigger? I'd stopped doing it, but it's still relevant because every single day you see the riggers coming out and engaging in their shenanigans. This recent foray by the GHRA, Guyana Human Rights Association, into this discussion on the IRI project is no different.
Since I believe I respectfully beg to disagree on a point you make, where the Ghana Human Rights Association perhaps is seeking relevance. I personally and really don't think so. I believe strongly that the Guyana Human Rights Association, in its true nature, has a political role to play. And anything that opposes, first and foremost, anything that opposes what appears to be a People's Progressive Party position, the Guyana Human Rights Association, or that one individual that constitutes an entire organization, which survives on funding from international organizations, millions of dollars, and does nothing in the interest of human beings and their rights in Guyana or anywhere else. I believe any position that purportedly opposes a view or anything that seems injurious to a process or injurious to the People's Progressive Party, the Guyana Human Rights Association is on board in the form of one person. The Guyana Human Rights Association, in the form of one person, is on board. And I stand corrected, and I say so unapologetically, and that is my firm view about the Guyana Human Rights Association. It's shameful to have an incumbent government attempt to thwart the will of the people, the right of the people to select a government of their choice. And the Human Rights Association remains silent. But when you attempt to engage in a process that fixes that problem, the Human Rights Association puts forward a red herring recommendation in an attempt to, again, thwart any effort to reform elections in Guyana.
But
And
um,
go ahead.
Michael, let me say this very quickly. Um, we can choose to dwell on the non-entities that are the GHRA, etc. But I want to say this. I believe that there are enough right-thinking people and sufficient right-thinking forces that exist in Guyana to ensure that this much vaunted and much needed electoral reform process will go on, and with or without the input of naysayers and the objections. That is by no means to suggest that it will be foisted upon the Guyanese public. I believe that a significant part of the IRI project is to have stakeholder buy-in and stakeholder participation in this process. However, like I said one day, if you want to stand in the way of progress, you can stand there. The train will go on. The train will go on because I believe the Guyanese people and enough stakeholders have recognized the need for this project, and it has the requisite support to go forward, with or without the naysayers.
Totally
But
agree.
I have attempted to cut off that, Michael, because there are some other aspects that I want to touch on that are more fundamental to this rigging process, and it is a development that we have seen occur today. It is a matter of public notoriety that the Commissioner of Police and the Director of Public Prosecutions have made an application to the Chief Justice to have the statements of poll generated from the general regional elections 2020. And if my memory serves me correctly, the statements of recount that were generated by the national recount exercise, also emerging from those elections, released copies thereof released for the purposes of the prosecutions that are ongoing in the magistrates court against Keith Lowenfield and others, other Roxanne Myers and other persons, Claremont Mingo, etc., that were key players in the rigging process in 2020. That application, in fact, I thought, in my humble private and legal opinion, it's a very straightforward process. And let me digress a little bit, because sometimes I think the public requires this information, and it is our duty as custodians of this information to divulge it to the public. Statements of poll are public documents. Statements of poll are, at least one copy is placed by law in a conspicuous place outside of the polling station after the conduct of the count. The count is done, the result from that station is ascertained, a copy is placed outside of the polling station. Anybody, you, me, my dog, my grandmother, my grandfather, as an observer, anybody, a politician, can go and look, take a picture of, and all that, of that statement of poll. Polling agents representing the political parties are entitled by law to copies of that statement of poll. They receive it, they take it back to their political parties, and it becomes part of what the bundle of results that political parties compile for themselves, who contested the elections. Copies of those statements of poll are sent to the Chief Elections Officer and to the returning officers of the 10 districts. That is how the results of the elections are compiled and computed, so that you know who's the winner and who's the loser and who has how many seats and so on. That's the statements of poll. So it's not a cloistered document that somebody hides in their cloak or in their bosom, that it ought not to be exposed. It is a public document. It just so happens by law, the Chief Elections Officer is the custodian of those documents. If you see there are stacks and stacks of containers in GECOM's compound, years and years of those documents from previous elections are kept there because this Chief Election Officer is the custodian of those documents. He doesn't own them. They are public documents. He just happens to be the keeper. Arising out of the elections petition that was heard, adjudicated, and determined by the Chief Justice. The first one, I think it was 99. Upon dismissal thereof, or at some point in the process, I believe, I don't hold myself hard and fast upon the dismissal, but the Chief Justice made an order that those statements of poll that the Chief Election Officer had in his custody, that the custody of that was changed. The custodian became the registrar of the Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice made that order according to law, as she was entitled to do, sitting during the hearing of an elections petition. One would have thought that Lowenfield, as the chief, the person in charge of the electoral process, would be happy to disclose the documents that represent the results of the election. The fact that he is holding on, he should have come to the court and said, I am happy. He should have to release these documents. He should have done that. He should have been happy to do it on the 3rd of March. But we have seen at all times, and I could only speak for myself, Michael, but sometimes you think that people don't have shame, because all of these things that not Michael Gardner Sase Gunraj saying, judicial pronouncements based on law and grounded in law are being made and said over and over about his actions. He is not a lone ranger. He's a creature of the commission. He has acted without jurisdiction. He has acted unlawfully. He has acted illegally. But yet has the temerity and audacity to attempt now to block the release of those public documents. It only leads to one conclusion, and I will leave that conclusion to be drawn very easily by the viewing public.
One of my very good friends made a very good point early in the night. And he said he's calling on the PNC and AFC supporters to come out and protest for their party to be more accountable to them, the supporters of those parties. He believes that the leaders of the PNC and the AFC should show their supporters the statements of poll on which they claim they have won the 2020 elections. Now, says we are back at the court. Mr. Lowenfield, through his attorney, Mr. Nigel Hughes, as you pointed out, has approached the court to prevent the Commissioner of Police or the Director of Public Prosecutions from accessing those statements of poll. These actions, in my mind, and these actions obviously continue and seem to be consistent with a particular position, a particular mindset, a particular line, a particular course of actions taken by the PNC in relation to the non-disclosure or the non-revealing of the information on the statements of poll. The PNC went so far, and I asked my operator to put up a photograph. On the morning of the 3rd, sometime during the course of the day, I believe it was the 3rd or the 4th of March 2020, the PNC went so far to have some of its candidates, activists, supporters remove statements of poll from polling places. And I have to continue to point to the silliness, the ridiculousness, and the barefacedness, the transparent manner with which someone can go to cheat. How much more can you go to cheat? It makes me wonder what these people did in examinations. We know what they do at congresses. We know what they're attempting to do in the current pending Congress. Like Valdi Lawrence did with the election, the leadership is now using the COVID pandemic argument against the very Valdi Lawrence who created the strategy. So it's one big mix-up at Congress Place. But how far does one go to cheat? And when does a supporter get to a point when he or she opens his eyes and say enough is enough? I'm speaking after Mr. Hugh Desmond Hoyt here. How
You
much
know,
can the leadership of a political party go to deceive their own people and deceive a nation?
maybe, Michael, the eternal optimist that lives within me makes me take this position and makes me less than bothered. You see, you and I, and by extension, the Guyanese population, can worry ourselves. While these are important matters, and I don't wish to trifle with their importance, I remember this. I remember this, Michael. And in
This is the
fact, a
PNC
moment
at work.
ago, I remember this. I remember this. And a moment ago when I was talking about the procedure for display of statements of poll, and I was telling you all and sundry was open to going to take it and take pictures and so on. This image did come to my mind because I did recall the blatant and naked attempts to remove them. And I think this picture that you have posted, I don't believe was the most egregious one that existed. You had
No, it
persons
wasn't.
with of more prominence and persons wearing party paraphernalia who are pictured doing this.
Staff of the Ministry of
In
Health
fact,
at that
if
time.
I look at my archives, I may find some of those pictures. But let
Thank
me
you,
get back to what I
operator.
was saying. Let me get back to what I was saying. We could easily sit here and dwell on the undemocratic practices of the PNC. We can sit here and, like I said, these are important matters that I am not attempting to trifle with them. But the reality is that there are so many other important things that are exist every day in this dynamic society in which we exist that ought to uh, ought to enjoy our attract our attention and engage our focus. But it's unfortunate that we have to deal with these issues. And they this importance of nation building, this importance of dealing with uh, all of the issues that crop up every day. And I hate to say it and sound like a broken record, but we're existing in a pandemic which throws up challenges of different kinds almost on a daily basis. And yet you have a bunch of people who are still hanging on, who are still hanging on. And despite the pronouncements of the court, despite despite the beating, and I want to use that word deliberately, the beating that is being delivered at every juncture, to every spurious application, to every silly challenge that is brought, every single one of them is just another frustration that the Guyanese people have to be putting up with, and it's unfortunate.
And I want to raise a particular issue, a couple of issues, and it relates to all that has happened in Guyana over the past 14 months or thereabout. And I'm going to speak to something that breaks my heart, says. I'm heartbroken about the fact that me, you, and hundreds of thousands of Guyanese, on our behalf, I am heartbroken. Hundreds of thousands of Guyanese who pay taxes. And I am really, really saddened. And I have to, I am holding back words as I speak. I am saddened by the fact that Guyana has been dumping billions of dollars in expired drugs procured by the APNU AFC. When the People's Progressive Party, while in opposition, warned them not to decentralize their procurement processes. And it led to wanton corruption and mismanagement of the health sector. Now we're seeing billions of dollars in medication and drugs being dumped because they're expired. Drugs that never got to the people. And at some point, say, someone has to ask, to my mind, and in the mind of many, and I believe it's factual because it can be proven. It borders on the realm, it delves into the realm of criminality. And my question to you says, therefore, is at what point does someone, some individual, or some group be held accountable for that such an egregious crime committed on the people of Guyana? At what
Michael,
point?
provision of a particular standard of healthcare, which includes the provision of drugs and pharmaceuticals as a part of that healthcare, is a basic human right. And the fact that we see all of this wanton wastage, for all the reasons that you have outlined, of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies, is testimony to the fact of the management of that is but a microcosm of the management that this country has suffered over that particular period. But I was telling you earlier on about the eternal optimist that lives within me. The, the reality is, right, you are wondering at which point will someone will be held criminally liable or accountable. You're wondering even before that when their supporters will wake up and understand what is happening. I dare say, the supporters have already woken up. The supporters have woken up, and that is why there was a change in government. That is why they are no longer mismanaging this. The electorate has caused that. So a significant part of the electorate has already woken up. And the only reason I believe, and I believe so quite respectfully, that you are not seeing every of the awakening that the remainder of their population that supported that administration, supported that political party, is because there's not been an election since. But wait, it will happen. As night follows day, it will happen. So be patient. Be patient. The last time I admonished the same thing. Patience. It will. The people are obviously waking up. And I would hope that persons are held accountable in a more meaningful manner than that which I just spoke about.
I totally agree with you. And like you, and like the Apostle Paul, I too am an incurable optimist. And I have no doubt and I have absolute faith in democracy and democratic processes. But the issue to which I referred, the Guyanese public has already suffered at the hands of Mr. Granger's mismanagement of this country in many areas, and I'm just highlight. And this is, as you said, this is this is a small representation of what happened across the board. But it's something that has already happened, and with actions, there are reactions, and with deliberate wrong actions, I believe there should be measures of accountability. Yes, the poll is one way of measuring accountability, and precisely that's the reason why the APNU AFC is in opposition as we speak. Nevertheless, I am also of the view that some folks, and I insist that someone or a group of people should be answerable to why billions of dollars, if my figures are correct, it's well in excess of $5 billion or bordering on $6 billion Guyana dollars lost to expired medication, and no one even bothers to attempt to give an explanation from the opposition standpoint. Every little insignificant issue which occurs in this country, and rumor, I dare say, is addressed by the leader of the office of the leader of the opposition. Why aren't major issues such as these addressed? And it is something I continue to be taken aback by. I believe there could be meaningful opposition, but it has to begin with honesty. And I strongly believe that there is a particular group of people, there's a political part or sect of the body politic of Guyana who are absolutely incapable, even though campaigned on such a platform, are absolutely incapable of honesty. And I couldn't put
You
it
see,
any other way, says.
and I appreciate your sentiments. I don't vehemently disagree with you. And the misfortune about all of that is that the monies that were expended on that kind of wastage could have been better spent for the benefit of all of the population, all of the populace of Ghana. But I want to touch. I know we have limited time before program time, Michael. I want to
Yeah,
touch on an issue. I want to touch on an issue, which incidentally was raised by someone on my social media page earlier tonight when I announced that I was going to be appearing with you on this program. The issue of rising prices for consumer items has been a very trending topic over the last few weeks. And I myself have sought to inquire as to the reasons for this. And, you know, it is very easy. The easiest thing that we possibly can do is to blame the government for every misstep or every occurrence in our everyday lives. Very easy to do. Or the government did this, or the government did that, and or the government didn't do this, and that is why this is happening. But there are several global factors um, that are responsible. For example, and I want to start. It is a matter of everyone knows that once the fuel prices rise, lots of basic items follow suit. And that is the first thing. The world market prices for fuel have risen. And obviously, Guyana is dependent on those world market forces in relation to fuel and fossil fuels. Secondly, globally, shipping prices have gone up for almost every. We are great. We are a large importer. Almost lots of items we import, and everything that has to be shipped again is obviously subject to those increased world prices for shipping. You know, a few days ago, I had someone sitting in my office who was involved in production, food production, and they were discussing with me the rising prices of their items. And I inquired, I said, you know, there are no new taxes on any of the input items. There's no new taxes that affects any aspect of your business. And the guy hastened to point out to me that in fact there are several tax reduction measures that emerged from the last two budgets of this administration, the emergency budget last year and the budget of this year, that have benefited to him, that sought to reduce, in fact, certain taxes that affect him. However, he pointed out that globally as well, several of his input items have gone up and the prices have gone up tremendously. And one of those items that we had a long discussion about was actually cooking oil. And I see a big hue and a cry about the rising price of cooking oil. I mean, I understand it's very justified that persons will complain about the rise in the prices, but sometimes we have to be realistic as to the reason for those increases. And and I think I think mitigating factors ought to be employed to cushion those increases.
I agree, and it's very important that you raise this point because whilst and I'm sure there is a general recognition of the current prices of fuel internationally and globally, and those who seek to make it political football are more than aware of the economics of fuel increases globally as juxtaposed against commodities imported and so on. And it comes back to my point of honesty. Whilst they are aware of the economics of that phenomenon, it continues to be used as a political talking point. And my point is, sis, as we prepare to close this program, as you rightly said, our time is all but gone. My point is, we continue to see and recognize and witness very disingenuous approaches to representing the constituents of the political opposition, whether in the National Assembly or whether discussing issues of national importance, or whether discussing issues of public health. Enter the issue of the COVID vaccination and the approach taken by the political opposition, notwithstanding the leadership of the political opposition, subscription to the vaccination program for them and their families, but yet continues to say to the masses um, and whisper to the masses that the vaccination program is not good for them. And there has to be some degree of exposure. And I believe we have done so sufficiently. I just a few nights ago, I addressed this issue with advisor to the Minister of Health, Dr. Leslie Ramsamy, and he even pointed to some members of the leadership. Remember, there was one time persons over 60 only qualified to be vaccinated. At that time, members of the leadership of the political opposition were calling him personally, and he said it publicly, to have their relatives who were not of that age vaccinated, who did not qualify at the time to be vaccinated. But yet, there is that whisper campaign discouraging um, members or their own constituents from their from being vaccinated, and it is a national issue. It's an issue of national importance, and it requires, say, some degree of responsibility in my own view.
Michael, I think you've brought us to a very, very opportune point to close this program. Yes, I agree that honesty is should be the watchword in every action or every step that is being taken both privately and publicly. But in terms of the vaccination, I have stated publicly that yesterday I received my second dose of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. And I encourage everyone. And you see, there there are many schools of thought, and I'm just regurgitating what I said earlier on today on social media. There are many schools of thought about the efficacy, etc., of the vaccines and effects, etc. But I believe it's better to be safe than sorry. And the quicker we achieve herd immunity in this country, the quicker we achieve herd immunity in this country, the quicker we can get back to our lives. Um, in fact, this morning when I made that post, a colleague of mine practicing in Trinidad actually shared it with a caption that Guyana is doing way better in terms of vaccination and vaccination rates than Trinidad and Tobago and lots of other places. The vaccine is readily available to us. Even in the first world, in the US, it is so difficult in certain states to actually get an appointment to get a vaccine. Um, there are still restrictions in terms of categories of persons who are entitled to it. In Guyana, as long as you're over the age of 18, you're entitled to it, and the rollout sites are so many. Yesterday, it was a very smooth and simple process to get that. I saw persons getting it without a hustler or a hustle. And I encourage persons to be responsible in their treatment of this. COVID-19 is everybody's business, and it affects each of us identically. It None of us has a lesser chance of getting it from than another person. So I believe that it is responsible, and even though you have been vaccinated, I encourage everyone to stay safe, continue to wear your masks, and be responsible adults, be responsible citizens of our country, not only in relation to um, not only in relation to COVID-19, but generally be a brother's keepers and ensure that this process of nation building uh, has the input of every one of us.
Attorney at Law and Commissioner of the Guyana Elections Commission, Mrs. Sase Gunraj, thanks again for sharing this moment with me as we bring to the Guyanese people information and we educate the Guyanese people on the current state of play and events within the body politic. I hope we can do this again.
We certainly will, Michael.
Okay. And to our
Thank you.
viewers across the length and breadth of Guyana, in the diaspora as well, and listeners on Freedom Radio, this has been Let's Talk Politics. I'm your host, Michael Gordon. A very special program brought to you by the People's Progressive Party, Civic. I'll see you again on Sunday night, but not before. My colleague Edward Lane joins you tomorrow night on this program, same place, same time. Good night.